you shoot Sony and you need a telephoto lens, you're probably looking at the Mac Daddy here, the 70-200 2.8 $2,800 lens, and you're wondering, is that really worth it? Or should I save $1,100 and spend $1,700 on the f4 variant? Or should you save even more and buy Tamron's 70-180 2.8 for $1,300? Let's find out. Let's first talk about build quality, and we'll start with the most expensive lens, Sony's 70-200 2.8. As soon as you take this lens out of the box, you'll realize why it costs so much. This thing feels incredibly nice. The zoom ring is super smooth and easy to turn, and it also has a very short throw. So zooming from 70 to 200 millimeters, you can do it incredibly quickly. On the front is a focus by wire focus ring. And this is one of the best feeling focus rings I have ever experienced on a lens. This thing is so nice and smooth, it feels good. In between both rings are 3 programmable focus hold buttons, which are gonna be great for wildlife or sports photography. Moving down further, there is a mechanical aperture ring like old school lenses, which allows you to set it to auto and control your aperture on the camera like you're probably used to. Or if for some reason you want to control your aperture mechanically, you can set it yourself here. And then on the other side of the lens, you'll see a button that says click on off. And if we turn this off, it's going to make our aperture ring smooth turning. So this is used sometimes in cinema to rack exposure smoothly. For me personally, I'll probably never use this feature. I'll leave it on auto and control my aperture with the camera itself. And so for me, I'm going to use this other switch here called Iris Lock, which keeps the entire ring from moving. Here we have 5 additional switches on this lens. The first one being autofocus to manual focus, full-time DMF on or off. This is going to allow you to fine-tune your focus manually by turning this focus ring while autofocus is still engaged. Next up, we've got the focus limiter. Right now it's set to full, which will give you the entire range of focusing. However, if you're going to be shooting wildlife or sports photography and you know your subject's never going to get close to the lens, you could limit your focus, and that's going to allow it to focus even more quickly because it's never going to have to hunt all the way close. Now it's only going to be looking for subjects off in the distance. Next up, we have optical stabilization on or off. This lens does have optical stabilizers inside, which is cool, and they work in tandem with the movement of the sensor in Sony cameras, as well as any digital stabilization that you might turn on in the camera as well. We're going to test that in a little bit. It also has 3 different modes of stabilization built into the lens. One is for stationary subjects. Number 2 is for panning. So if you were shooting like a race car moving by or an animal running by, you would want to choose number 2. And 3 is for moving subjects. So if you were shooting something like a bird that could potentially go anywhere, you'd choose number 3. This lens is pretty heavy and it comes with a much needed collar. So instead of using a tripod plate on your camera, when you've got a lens this big and this heavy, you're gonna want to attach the tripod plate to the lens itself, and it just creates a nice balanced lens and camera. Finally, the lens comes with a hood, and I think this is the nicest lens hood I have ever seen. It just feels nice and well built right out of the box. It snaps into place with a very satisfying click. And I know you guys probably can't see this, but inside is this really nice felt material that's just gonna do a great job of eating up any additional light that might be coming in from the sides of the lens. Now let's compare it to the f4 version. Sony did a great job of making both of these lenses match. They both feel very similar in terms of build quality. You will notice a few things right off the bat. One being, instead of the locking mechanism on the lens hood, it's just got a friction lock. And with the 2.8 version, the zooming mechanism, everything is happening inside, so it's not actually moving any part of the barrel. Whereas the f4 version, you can see, has pretty significant movement on the front element. The zoom ring on this lens still feels really, really nice. Usually when I've tested lenses that have this long of an extension, they do not feel this smooth. The throw of the zoom ring is longer on this lens than the other lens. So zooming from 70 to 200, it'll take you a fraction of a second longer. I'm happy to say that the focus ring feels the exact same. So slippery and smooth. I've never felt anything like this. I love it. This lens also comes with the 3 programmable buttons here. It does not come with the mechanical aperture ring, but it does still give us the same 5 switches here with one additional feature. We have the limit for subjects far away from the camera, so again, sports or animals, but then we also have a macro option. So if you were shooting something very small, like an insect, maybe you want to switch over to macro, and that's only going to allow the camera to focus on very close subjects. Now, the reason this lens has this option and the 2.8 variant doesn't is because this lens has a significantly better minimum focusing distance. That means you can zoom in much closer and still focus on really small objects or get really close to subjects with this lens than you will with the significantly more expensive 2.8 version. I'm glad that it still came with the collar. You're definitely gonna wanna use it because this thing is very heavy on the front of a normal camera. In comes Tamron's 70 to 180 millimeter f2.8. Now, holding both of these lenses in my hands, I'm almost positive that this lens is made of metal and this is made of plastic. At least that's what it feels like. Both of these lenses weigh almost the same, but there's no doubt that this one is built much better. The zoom ring on the Tamron feels surprisingly good. Again, much better than lenses I've used in the past. Not quite as good as the Sony's, but very impressive. The focus ring feels fine, but nothing like Sony's focus rings. I've never felt anything like those lenses, so you guys gotta try it for yourself. It's like the smoothest feeling focus ring I've ever felt. And then other than this zoom lock here, which just keeps the lens from creeping forward, that is it. There are no programmable buttons, there are no switches, there is no optical stabilization. What you see is what you get, but you will save some money. Now, Tamron has released a newer version of this lens that does have optical stabilization. It's $1,300. This lens is still being sold for $1,200. I would say it's definitely worth buying the newer one. So there's no doubt that Sony lenses have way more features and much better build quality. But what about image quality? I shot each lens at 70, 180, and 200 millimeters through the entire aperture range. Sony's 2.8 lens totally blew me away, almost no vignetting at f2.8. Sony's f4 and Tamron's 2.8 lens suffer slightly from vignetting wide open, but it's really not too bad. You can see it clean up quickly at f4. When it comes to sharpness, Sony's 2.8 lens is almost flawless. Most lenses, when you shoot them wide open, have significantly softer images than when you stop down a little bit. Not these Sony lenses. They look almost the exact same at f2.8 and f4 for the first lens. On the very edges of the frame, you'll notice that the f4 lens is slightly softer, and we get a very similar result from Tamron's lens as well. Now let's talk about stabilization. Remember, both Sony lenses have optical stabilization. The Tamron doesn't have any of that. So I was curious to know, how important is that feature? What does Sony's optical stabilization actually do? I tested every option when it comes to stabilization with this lens, as well as every stabilization option in the new Sony A9 III. And this is very difficult to test, and it's also very difficult to show you on camera what I was experiencing. Although I could see a difference when it came to stabilization with this lens versus the Tamron, it wasn't quite as significant as I thought. And I think the easiest way to show this is with all of the stabilization options turned on in the camera. Stabilizer mode 1 on the Sony here, zoomed out to 70 millimeters. This is me walking with both of the lenses. I would never normally walk handheld with a 70 millimeter lens, but I think this is the easiest way for you to see the stabilization difference between both of these lenses. The Sony is a little bit better, but it's not quite as big of a difference as I was expecting. Now let's compare bokeh. The reason you're gonna wanna buy a lens like this is because you wanna back up, zoom in, focus on your subject, but get that nice, beautiful, shallow depth of field where your subject is in focus, but then the background goes quickly out of focus. The bokeh looks very similar out of both of these lenses, but if I had to choose, I've got to give it to Sony. I feel like the bokeh is slightly more beautiful. It's a little bit smoother and prettier, but man, it's pretty close. Now, obviously, the f4 variant has a huge disadvantage here. It can't shoot at f2.8, so its depth of field is not going to be nearly as shallow. And maybe you're the type of photographer who's always shooting outside in the middle of the day. You don't need a really fast lens because you have plenty of light. But for me personally, I still really prefer the look of a shallower depth of field. I love shots taken at 2.8 or faster. And so that is a huge hit for the f4 variant. Now, one thing I did notice with this bokeh test is the footage out of both Sony lenses had a little bit more contrast than my Tamron lens. I felt like the Tamron lens was a little bit more washed out looking. I could easily fix this by moving a slider over just a little bit when I get into post, but it's still worth mentioning. Now, for my entire career as a professional photographer, I have heard people online talking about how different lenses, even the same lens, but different variants of the same lens will create different colors and you can get a good or a bad version of the lens. I have never experienced this before, and I've never even really experienced a big difference in color when it comes to lenses, even comparing different brands. So I definitely wanted to test the color on each one of these lenses. I set up this incredibly scientific set here in my office. I lit it with a strobe to make sure that every single shot was the exact same. And when I look at the colors here, they look the exact same to me. Maybe the Sony lenses have slightly more contrast, but when it comes to color, it all looks the same to me. Let's talk about autofocus. I tested all three of these lenses with both video and stills, and I was getting very, very similar results. When it comes to shooting video, racking focus between subject and background was 100% accurate. It was the exact same on all three of these lenses. I set up this stress test where I was walking towards each one of these lenses through very dark shadows. Each lens did that perfectly. So then I ran at each lens and it still did it absolutely perfectly. Now, I can't show you what it's like shooting stills, but I was hunting, subjects close and far away, and each one of these lenses felt almost the exact same to me. Now, I wasn't able to shoot athletes or race cars or trains or airplanes or wildlife, but for me and what I shoot, mostly portraits and video, the autofocus on all three of these lenses was absolutely perfect and silent. And I think that just goes to show you that, yes, these lenses are all amazing, but I think just Sony's autofocus performance and what's going on in the camera may matter more these days than the lenses themselves. All right, let's wrap this up. What are my final thoughts? If you have the money and you want to spend $2,800, I don't think you're gonna go wrong with this lens. It's unbelievable. It's probably gonna hold its value because it's so good. But you're paying a lot of money for a bunch of features that you may never use. I mean, the fact that this thing has the mechanical aperture ring and then the ability to make it rack smoothly so that you could rack focus in some video shoot is just a feature that 99.9% of photographers and videographers will never use, but you're paying for it. Sony's f4 variant also blew me away, and this lens has the best minimum focusing distance of the three. First, second, third place. So if you find yourself shooting small objects or getting really close to your subject, this is the clear winner. Literally, the only problem that I have with this lens is you don't have that 2.8 shallow depth of field. You're gonna have to start at f4. For many photographers and videographers, that's gonna be fine. You're not gonna miss it at all. For me personally, I gotta have 2.8. I gotta have it. I'm just gonna miss it if I don't have it. The Tamron lens and the sharpness and vignette test came in a very clear third place. However, in the real world, when you're taking real photos and pictures of people, places, and things, I'm not sure you're actually gonna be able to notice that. Yes, these two lenses have optical stabilization built in. The Tamron does not. However, it just wasn't that significant of a difference. Yes, I feel like the Bokeh out of Sony's lens was slightly more beautiful than the Tamron, but they were both very, very close. And when it comes to one of the most important features of all, autofocus, all three of these lenses performed almost the exact same. If you want to save the most money possible, buy this lens used on eBay, but if you want to buy the new one, upgrade to the newest version that has optical stabilization. It's $1,300. I wish there was a clear winner here, but this is a very clear case of you get what you pay for. There's no doubt that this $2,800 lens is the best of the three, but I don't know that it's worth $1,500 more to me personally versus this lens. You just need to decide, is it worth spending more money to get a slightly nicer lens? We are doing photography contests with big prizes that are totally free to join every single month. Currently, the contest is architectural photography, so if you've taken pictures of homes or buildings inside or out, upload them for free. You can win $1,000 cash for first place, $500 cash for second, and third through 10th place are all going to get a free tutorial from the F-Stopper store. And while this contest is running, we are doing the biggest sale ever on our most successful tutorial ever, Where Art Meets Architecture with Mike Kelly. If you're interested in breaking into real estate or architectural photography, this is for you. This is by far our most successful tutorial. We've been selling it for years for $300, and this is the cheapest it has ever been for just 75 bucks. Check it out in the link below or fstoppers.com/store. Hey, you.
Hi.
Do you know what these are?
Yeah.
What are they?
King bombs.
they are camera lenses.
I got 4 monster trucks.
You got 4 monster trucks?
Yeah.
Whoa, that's awesome.